So, answer the question on everybody's minds. Is Bernie Sanders going to do it one more time?
I think he has said no. I think look, I think there are while Bernie is physically like an insane specimen, I don't think people it is actually just ridiculous how in shape that guy is. I think running for president over the age of 80 is a bad idea, and I think everybody tends to agree with that at this point.
Yeah, didn't he have a heart attack and then go to a campaign event kind of, a day later, 2 days later?
No. He was at a campaign event. And then, 2 weeks it was, we 2 weeks.
Still pretty good. That's still pretty good.
I mean, the fun, story about that was we were in the hospital in Nevada, and he was insisting on, like a day after the heart attack, he was insisting on walking laps around the hospital, which was creating all sorts of stuff, because obviously Bernie just walking around the hospital doing laps, but he didn't, did not want to stay in bed. He was like, I want to walk around. Can I go outside? No, you cannot go outside. Let's walk around he would walk around the hospital like a day later. It was actually, that was one of those 2 days were some of the, I don't even know how to describe, like the proper word to describe it. Like you're on a presidential, you're with your candidate has to go to the hospital. They tell you they have to put stents in, right? You're in this zone. And,
when was this? Give us set the scene for the people who are listening. When was this in the campaign cycle?
So this was October 1st, 2019. So right as the fourth quarter start, literally that evening of the fourth quarter starting, we were at a small campaign event in Las Vegas, actually. And I realized something was wrong when he asked for a chair, because he does not like to sit at events. He likes to stand and address the audience. He asked for a chair. We got in the car. It was me, him, and a body man that had started at 5:00 that afternoon.
Oh,
great first day.
Good first day. Now that body man had worked in advance for Bernie since 2015, but really had not had a lot of contact with him.
The day-to-day job is very different.
So the body man was driving the car. Bernie was in the front seat. I was in the back seat, and kind of started quizzing him on what's wrong. And it just became very clear. And he was like, I'm fine. I was like, can we at least get a doctor to your hotel room? And he was like, you can do that? Yes. You're running for president. I can have a doctor come to your hotel room. That is even in this healthcare system we have here. And I kind of started talking, and I basically made the call in the motorcade that we were going to an urgent care. We had to go to an urgent care, and there was nothing catastrophic. He was up. It was just very clear something was off. Wrong enough that I was like, we can't go back to, we need to figure it out. We went to the first urgent care right off the Las Vegas Strip, and they were like, we're too busy. We can't deal with this. We're like, okay. So we
good luck.
American healthcare. We ended up at this other urgent healthcare called Elite Medical, which is like behind MGM. So if you know Vegas, it's like behind the MGM Grand. There's an urgent care. And I walked in the doors. I was like, if I have a celebrity, do they have to sit in the waiting room? And they were like, celebrity. And I was like, they were like,
you're on Frank Sinatra way. What are you talking about?
They're like, show us a driver's license and we'll make a decision. I went out, I got his driver's license, I brought it in. They're like, yeah, take him in the back. And they brought him in. They were like, we have to, doctor came out 10 minutes later, was like, we have to go, which hospital do you want?
Which hospital do you want to go to? Yeah.
We have to go.
Thankfully,
I worked for Reed. I knew Las Vegas a little bit. We went to this.
Yeah, that's why you know Las Vegas a little bit.
A little bit.
Can I? Yeah.
And so the other funny part is so the two funny parts of the scene is we get in the ambulance to go to the hospital. right? I have advanced people running over to like get a path in. The body man's driving the car in front of the ambulance. Like we're like, and I'm in the front, like of the ambulance in the front seat, trying to like text everybody, coordinate, call his wife, like do all that kind of stuff. And I hear in the back, so what kind of healthcare do you get as a paramedic in Las Vegas? And he's just like he's trying to engage this woman in a call. This woman is trying to like
always working the angle.
Oh, do you get good at, and then we pull up to the thing. We pull up into the hospital, and the doctor's meeting us there. And the doctor's first, he had handed me into the ambulance. They were like, "Take off your wedding ring." He took off his wedding ring. He handed it to me. They're like, "Take off your glasses." He's like, "Nope, not happening."
Not happening.
He drives. So we arrive at the hospital. The like doctors, Dr. Marchand, who was a very good doctor, meets us at the thing, and they start going through the questions, like, "Are you allergic to eggs?" He's like, "Oh, just answer the question." Like, I don't know if you're allergic to eggs. What do you think? And then they're like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? He goes, "That is a bullshit question, guys." like
coaching the medical staff
like, this
on
is
the proper etiquette.
But we get through and you're in this moment where I was with like 4 staff, like his body man, one of his like most senior advanced people, this woman Charla Bailey, and this other advanced guy, and we're kind of sitting in the waiting room there, and they're like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Okay, the campaign is over, guys. Like we have a 70-year-old guy who just had a candidate who just had a heart attack. Like we're done." But we have to do our jobs tonight,
right?
Because we personally owe it to him to keep this thing on the tracks. So keep running through the bag, guys. Like we gotta it's a sad moment, but let's focus on that tomorrow. Let's get through tonight. And so the doctor comes in. He comes out of putting the stent in, go into his room. He looks right at Charla, who was the advanced person when he had banged his head on a shower door and needed stitches earlier in the campaign. And he goes, "Why every time you're with me, I'm in a hospital, Charla?" But what was immediately noticeable is it was instant. I didn't even notice it before. The color had returned to his face. It was oh, okay. It was it was nothing. And it was almost immediate, I guess blood is blocked and it's not blocked. And suddenly you're like, this is awesome.
Well,
and it's not major, right? It's laparoscopic. And anyway, that was, but that, yes. So,
the Bernie
but
Sanders
we want
moment.
to talk about 2028, I assume.
Well, can I just tell one story? So, because you just reminded me of when you worked for Harry Reid. We worked for Harry Reid during for the Democratic Party during the caucuses back in 2008. And so, we were very lucky that the Democratic Party of Nevada would set up all of our meetings on Fridays in Las Vegas. So we would fly in Thursday night, me and my then business partner, Bill Buck. We would fly in on Thursday night. We would spend the day in meetings on Fridays. And then basically we had the weekend in Vegas, right? And we'd overnight back on Sunday. And so, but this one weekend, there was some kind of Democratic Party meeting on Saturday morning. That everybody was at, including Senator Reid. But Friday night, we decided to go out. It's our first time in Vegas. We decided to go out. We do Vegas hard. It's 4:00 in the morning. We get in. I have to be at this thing at 9:00 in the morning. I show up at this thing. I'm sure my eyes are bloodshot red. I probably still have a little whiff of the hooch on me. And Harry Reid, someone, I think Rebecca or somebody, introduces me to Harry Reid.
Rebecca Lamb.
Rebecca Lamb.
Yeah.
And I say, "Oh, Senator Reid, nice to meet you." And he looks at me and he goes, "First time in Vegas?"
So my story,
and he turned around and walked away. That was it. That was the end of the conversation.
My story like that is I was in Vegas for some meetings, and I was at the Mirage, and it was a really good poker game, and I played all night before the meeting. I literally played from I got in at 5, and I played from 6 to 7 in the morning nonstop. And I go to the meeting, and Jim Manley turns to Harry Reid and is like, "Yeah, Ari was gambling in the casino all night." And Harry Reid starts going through the odds of every game and why it's a bad idea to gamble with me. And in blackjack the casino holds this, and in this the casino. And I was I was playing poker. He goes, "Oh, that's okay." And
I love it. I love it. All right. We are here to talk about 2028. We've been reminiscing here on Trailblaze, but we are here because we are the first podcast to focus on 2028 exclusively. So we want to have this conversation today about who's next in the Bernie lane. And how do you think about that, Ari, as somebody who has been in that lane almost from the beginning?
Well, there's a mistake in that lane that people...
Okay.
There's a big mistake, and it honestly... It's interesting to me that, like, years afterwards, there was something that seemingly only us and Biden understood, and a bunch of other campaigns never did. And that is, when we were thinking about Bernie voters strategically, starting in 2018 into 2019, 2020, because it was a very different campaign than 2015, 2016, where 2015, it was kind of a one-on-one match. And it was progressives and people who didn't like Hillary Clinton, right? No,
Yes.
which was a significant group of people who just did not like Hillary Clinton. And that formed the Bernieverse. And there was this assumption, and people kept talking about a progressive lane. And what we saw very early on, we ran some polling in 2018 to kind of assess where we were and what we could think about. And very early on, we started phrasing it differently. We called it beer track, wine track as our division. And our voters were the beer track. And by the way, Joe Biden's core voters were also beer track, right? And it wasn't ideological, because what you quickly realize is Democratic primary voters, exist in actually a very fairly narrow ideological window of people. They tend to, even the moderate voters in a Democratic primary, when you go issue by issue with them, they're almost every Democratic voter's like, yeah, I want universal health care. And almost every Democratic voter's anti-war. Almost every Democratic, voter fully supports. There's kind of a very... There are other questions that decide it, that a lot of voters make their decisions on, and a lot of that is cultural. And we called it beer track, wine track, right? Where like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were seemingly both progressives, but the difference was Elizabeth Warren was a wine track candidate, Bernie is a beer track candidate, right? What does that mean functionally? Elizabeth Warren's voters were much more educated, right? Wealthier, actually tended to be whiter than Bernie's voters. Bernie's voters have like a lot of Latinos, actually, in Bernie's voting population. And Bernie's voters, less education, less income, different, that group. And the division, the biggest division in the Democratic primary, and I feel like this doesn't go away in 2028, is the cultural divisions led to another question: is, do I think my candidate can win? Which, beyond any ideological measure, was the most important thing voters looked at in 2020. Do I think, who can beat Donald Trump? And I feel like for 2028, Democratic voters will be similarly asking that question, right? Who do I think can win? There will be much more than, like, I would say 20 years ago, and much more than any, I do a lot of campaigns in other countries now. Strategic voting is actually a very real thing among Democrats in presidential races. And I feel like what leads to a lot of those conclusions voters derive is some cultural touch points here.
So it's funny because you said beer track, wine track, and I was thinking there's a third track. I was trying to figure out how to characterize it, and I would put that as the cookout track. And the cookout track are particularly African American voters, and I think then some of them might be wine people, and some of them, might be beer people, but they are going to be much more of a cohesive group. When they will move much more cohesively than I think many others in the primary. And so, while I think
right, and that's another
this is one thing Biden sort of understood, that there was like a third lane, particularly in the Democratic primary, that I think that like winning the votes of African American women in particular in the Democratic primary would be a very decisive thing.
Yes, in particular, older.
Hmm.
You
Right.
know, uh, older African American women, older African American men was very decisive for Biden,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, and I agree. I you could put that third track in, and I think we try to track. I think there's this sense, like in DC, in particular among media, but it spreads into like political conversation to want to divide people ideologically, and it doesn't work as well. Like the cultural stuff works, like beer track, wine track, cookout track. That's how voters are going to break out. And candidates, we knew from
Is that
very
true for
early.
Republicans too? Because is like if you think about Trump versus like a Romney, right? Or Trump
Well, I think
versus like
their
Jeb
tracks,
Bush.
A Jeb
their,
Bush,
their
right? Like
tracks, and
Trump's more Bush. I mean beer, and Jeb's more wine.
but it was different among them, and I think it somewhat was true. But theirs was a, you had this problem where you had a small core that represented the kind of elite of the Republican Party. Let's call it like the country
Mm.
club doctors, right? And like the business guys and that. But then you had this broad like reach of like right wing Christians, kind of anti immigrant folks, uh, gun folks, kind of working class culturally working class, not necessarily economically working class, but culturally working class
Yeah.
voters in the Republican Party. And Trump kind of realized the country club Republicans were actually who controlled everything, right? They were the Romney folks. They were the George W. folks. They were the guys who kept winning, were kind of outside the mainstream of the Republican Party. And if you read about kind of his 2015 campaign, you read in his kind of run up to it, he had the staffer, I think the guy's name was Sam, who was listening to like all the talk radio shows every day in 2013, 2014, and like writing down what each caller was talking about, and realized that that this instinct among Republicans that goes all the way back to Reagan, but certainly Bush carried it out forward, and then they kind of lost it in '08, and then they had that autopsy in 12 that said you have to be more pro-immigrant. That was like totally anathema to this
Right.
huge core of Republicans, and they you read about the Trump people learning that by listening to a lot of talk radio and realizing all these callers hated immigrants.
Interesting. I mean, Matt, we've been talking about this a lot, particular around a couple of personalities. Um, AOC, Ro Khanna. What do you think about this analysis that we're hearing from her?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I'm actually in my head, I'm trying to like kind of go through and thinking about AOC and thinking about, she's a different kind of beer track
Yes.
politician though, right? And it's I wonder if there's there's going to be a new sort of
It's
characterization of that. I mean,
craft
I also
beer.
think yeah, well, some of
She's
them
like
are, some of them are sure,
craft
but
beer and sort of basic. All right.
I also
Go
think
ahead.
there's going to be a lot of this is going to be how kind of the age of the voters, right? I think even
Yeah.
more so. There's, now there are 10 years worth of, younger voters that are now in the voting pool that weren't when Bernie ran in 2018, 2019. And so how is that going to play out? And, is AOC going to appeal to those kind of people? So, I mean, look, I think what I'd really like to hear is just sort of what you do think of AOC, because that is the person who is, at least a lot of people are talking about her as sort of the heir to the Bernie lane,
Yeah.
whether that is a beer lane or a wine lane or whatever
I
ideological lane it is. What do you think about AOC and her chances and what she's
let
done
me
so far?
first channel Bernie for a second. I
Yeah,
think
please.
he would object to the concept of an heir, right?
Okay.
He doesn't
Mm.
like, this is a guy who didn't endorse his daughter when she ran for mayor of Burlington, didn't endorse his son. Like, he doesn't believe in dynastic politics, right?
I love that. I love that.
Right. It's just fundamentally, he would say, like, these aren't his people to give away. And his endorsement, he'll think about an endorsement, obviously, and I think go through a process with that. But he would say, like, this isn't mine to give away, right? The person's going to have to earn it. in that world.
Yeah.
I think, look, I think with AOC, and I've said this to people, I've said this before to a reporter who asked me, like, I think she starts with like inherent advantages that Bernie doesn't have. Like, her coalition could be much broader than Bernie's, just automatically. And I think it's an interesting thing. I think she is, look, I don't know if she's going to run. I would say she has very smart people around her who have been through a number of presidential cycles, which I think, first off, advantages over. I don't think people account that advantage that she has over other people like Mike Casca, people like Oliver, who are in her orbit, who, Mike's her chief of staff, who, he did 2 cycles with Bernie in senior roles on a presidential campaign. He kind of knows the stuff that needs to be done, which I think is huge over some other people, and is very smart. I think they, if I can, an outside perspective on what they're doing is, I think they're leaving their option. They are making sure they have options, which I think is important for every candidate right now, because there's the Mario Cuomo story that a consultant loved to tell about, like, they were on their way to New Hampshire in their car, and Mario Cuomo was on the tarmac ready to announce, and then decided he wasn't announcing. So, like, but you need to be able to, from a staff level, I think it's incredibly important to make sure you have that choice, right? Whether she wants to stay in the House, whether she wants to run for Senate, whether she wants to run for president, making sure she has that choice. And I think her staff is actually doing an exceptional job leaving all those options on the table for her to ultimately decide. I think when you think about
but do you think that she's doing a good job appealing to you talked about earning the votes. Do you think that she is appealing to the same part of the electorate that Bernie had captivated?
I think some of it, I think she actually appeals to some broader parts that Bernie could not touch. I think there are a number of people who were like Elizabeth Warren voters who, when we looked at our Venn diagram of voters, say in Iowa, right? Elizabeth Warren's circle was over here. Bernie's circle was over here, right? They were actually not touching each other.
So you're saying, for those who are listening, they're far apart.
They were not the same voters. Like our voters in Iowa, which was like very different than South Carolina, but in Iowa, let's take Iowa and New Hampshire, our voters and Biden's voters were like concentrically overlapped with each other. And like all our second choices were like, not all, but like a significant point. When we polled our people, their second choice was like mainly Biden, right? Which I think is not what people think about, but also leads to, when people ask about that, like Biden, Bernie, very much like friendship, and like it was not only real among them, it was real among our voters, right? There was a significant overlap there. I think with her, she captures a bunch of that Elizabeth Warren stuff that were like just unavailable to us in a Democratic primary. I think she captures that. That's where it is not a pure, I think beer track, wine track worked for 2020 in how the kind of available voter electorate broke up, and how the candidates themselves presented themselves, right? Like Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren were kind of like pure wine track voters, wine track candidates. Bernie and Biden were much more beer track. And as you said, Biden had access to the cookout track, which, was a huge advantage built in. I think if I haven't looked at polling, that some of that exists, but I think the youth thing matters. And like, if I'm thinking about presidential candidates in 2028, it would seem crazy to me. And this has nothing to do with my support or anything. If there was like a Kalshi market that said the Democratic nominee will be under the age of 50, all my money would go into that market, right? Like every dollar of my money would go into that market. I think Democratic voters want something young, want something different, don't trust. And we're seeing this in primaries. I'm in Colorado. We're going to, like, Diane DeGette might lose today her primary, and it's not about her, and it's not even about ideology. It's about voters don't trust people they view as part of a party that they view as having failed them for a long time. So a younger candidate obviously has advantages in that regard.
Less of that baggage.
And I think if I'm
Well, if you
thinking
think about
about
our successful presidential nominees, I mean, Carter was the oldest, and Carter was 52 when he won in 76. Clinton was 46. Obama was 47
and
or
by the
48.
way, all three, and it's really weird to think about like
Clinton's
Clinton and
43.
Obama this way, were outsiders, right?
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer in Georgia who the like establishment was like, that guy's a hick from Georgia. Obama was facing off against Clinton in 08 and was the outsider candidate versus Clinton. And Clinton in 92 was some weird dude from Arkansas. Like he wasn't everyone thought Mario Cuomo was going to be the guy. He was like, and he didn't run, but then you had a bunch of senators and you had a bunch of other people who were more insiders. I think what we've seen in our successful nominees has been since Kennedy, like post Kennedy, has been outsider, young. And my sense is that's what we're going to do. I think that's where voters are going to gravitate this time.
Everybody argues change, right? Like, and so you're running, it's just a trope, right? All the candidates going to argue change. The ones that tend to win, I think, on the Democratic side, maybe it's true for the Republicans too, but I've spent less time thinking about it, is change of direction, not just change of management.
Yeah.
Right. So too often, like Hillary Clinton was like change of management in 2008. Obama was change of direction. And the same thing was sort of true with Bernie in 2016. He was arguing for like a change of direction. And I think that voter lives, so that instinct in Democratic voters survives candidacies.
Yeah. And I think we are in a particular point where there's a huge lack of trust in people viewed as DC, let's call it DC, right? Yeah. But that also could swing in other directions, by the way. You could see someone like an Andy Bashir successfully saying, I'm like in Kentucky, I'm a different guy. I've never been part of that. You could see him making that argument. But I do think that is the bigger diagram. And I think if you're like a longtime senator, let's say, I think you're going to have problems in this race, because I think it's harder to make an argument that you're not a creature of DC. And I think that's toxic. The other problem is it's not just about arguing change. And look, I think this matters on candidate policy pronouncements. Let's say the Newsom like billionaires tax thing. It's not the policy. It's do I believe the policy, right? And do I think that what does that policy say about the candidate? And the biggest problem candidates face is when what a policy pronouncement says about the candidate is they're a phony.
Yes,
like and that like, look, I think you look at like Kamala Harris in 2016, and I think one of the errors she made was, so Kamala was the first senator to jump on Medicare for all when we were going to introduce the bill in 2017. Literally, like out of nowhere, we got a call from her staff saying she's going to announce she's co-sponsoring the bill tonight. It was like August, and like we were talking about it, but we hadn't like said like right in there, right? And like signed her name to it. Great. And then she went to that debate and then was asked that question.
She raised her hand.
She raised her hand and then like was like, oh shit, her, backed off it. To me, like people, like, so there are some people saying that's smart politics. I was like, okay, but like, I don't think it is. The biggest problem you just faced is you just told voters not what you support. You told voters they can't trust your policy. Like your policy pronouncement wasn't policy. It was, I can't trust you on that. And I think the other thing of the Trump error, and I think this goes to Bernie and Biden in 2020. Look, Bernie and Biden were the two candidates, and it never would surprise me that they were the two left at the end who, like, they were who they were. Nobody thought Bernie or Biden were like consultant directed guys. Biden was the guy who like, and I always thought this was like a huge strength, and other people, especially other campaigns, were always like laughing at these moments. I was like, this is his biggest strength, was like when he was at a town hall and told a voter to go F themselves, which is like a repeated thing in like 2019 would like repeatedly be like, go vote for Trump. Like, I don't like, because the point, and like Joe Biden wasn't going to sign on to Medicare he was never going to like even try to play around. Like, I'm for Medicare for all who want it. Like, no, he just wasn't going to play that. He's like, I'm Joe Biden. This is what I believe. And voters just knew, like with Bernie and Biden, there was just no doubt they were who they were. They were authentic, right? There's like an authenticity score.
In every story, there's a hero and a villain.
Yep.
And this is something I've talked to a lot of candidates about this. It's either you versus another candidate or another politician, another leader, you versus another person, you versus the system, or it's you versus yourself. And you versus yourself is always the worst story that you can ever have, right? Because you're going to lose. Yeah. You're guaranteed to lose in that story.
And if I were talking to a presidential candidate right now, which I have talked to a few of them, like the thing I've said is like, don't fall into those traps of like figure out what you believe and just believe that stuff. And like, don't fall into the trap of feeling like you need to have like a plan. And you need to have a plan for everything, especially stuff you don't believe in. Like believe in it or you get like famished, basically. It's the oldest lesson of where Matt and I met. Like one of the first lessons I learned in presidential politics when Matt and I worked for Kerry. And like, we all remember, like, I voted for it before I voted against it.
Oh, this was the worst
like,
line.
One of the worst things I've ever heard. Like, we all I think everybody, like all 1,000 people, what was that on like 14th Street, the headquarters above the Starbucks on
15th Street.
Yes. On 15th Street.
Yes.
Like, I think all 3 floors of that headquarters were just like,
yeah, it was a collective groan.
Like, because I think, Jamal, the way you put it is absolutely right. That was John Kerry versus himself. And why did that happen? That happened because John Kerry twice voted what I would say against what he core believed. John Kerry should have voted against the Iraq war and for the funding, right? Saying, yes, I've experienced war. I'm voting against this because I know I've been through it. This is terrible, but I'm always going to be for funding the guys in the field because I didn't know John Kerry well, but from what I know, that's what he actually believed.
Yeah. But instead, that whole campaign is different. If he votes against the war or early on, there's no Howard Dean. He just gets to be consistent the whole way through. It's what his whole, like, his first bit of fame was based on, being against
the war. It's what we knew about him.
For the exactly troops, right. And, 4 soldiers standing up for the guys in the field, standing up for his swift boat buddies against the war.
I mean, look, I will tell you, I looked at this about vice presidents too, in particular, because my old job working for a vice president. And I think it holds in many ways. The American public, how they meet you is very often how they think about you almost forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like John Kerry's big moment was in front of that Senate committee, right? Or like even when people first met Bernie, they didn't really know who Bernie was, but like he was this kind of disheveled guy. He was arguing against the system. So like the Bernie of 2015 and the Bernie of 2020, 19 or 20, and the Bernie of today are really like the same person. Or you think about Barack Obama in 2004, that speech in Boston, he basically gave that same speech. He gave that same speech last week at the library. Right? It's the same fundamental concept.
We did an ad on the Bernie campaign. We had an ad that was I called it the Kobe ad because it was kind of mapped on the Kobe at the end of his career when he was trying Nike ad, where it just showed scenes from his career. We did an ad that was Bernie, and it was Bernie giving a speech, and it was a continuous speech that basically takes clips from 40 years and just runs the speech. And the only part from 2020 was him saying, "If we stand together, there's nothing we can't accomplish." But it was like very clear, Bernie. That you see the very different Bernies. But what strengthens Bernie? It's that authenticity. And I think you have to remember, like, people mistake authenticity. Authenticity isn't truthfulness, right? Donald Trump is an authentic liar.
Yeah, right.
Right?
And
Like
everybody knows it. And
everybody knows
it.
he is authentic, but that's what works. Like
It's baked
why
in.
Donald Trump works is he's authentic. Like everybody knows who he is. They're like totally on his side. They accept it. And he's an authentic liar, right? I think if I'm looking at candidates now in the Democratic primary for strength, it's somebody who is purely authentic, somebody who's younger, and somebody who can legitimately and authentically say, I'm against the system. And I think, look, I think AOC can do that. I think, look, let's talk about Roe for a second. You know, somebody I know pretty well as a person and as, you know, a politician. I think Roe has set himself up very well as anti-establishment. I think what has set him up there, like you think about what does policy communicate as a person, what's the policy people will know about Roe right now? And he's got a lot of policies, and he's actually a thoughtful guy on this stuff and thinks about stuff, and like is interesting because he's not as purely, he's like in the Bernie lane, but like, you know, he pronounces this capitalism all the time, right? It's a very different, he's not like a pure, but what do people know about him? The Epstein thing he did with Thomas Massie is like, I think, what does that say? That says he's anti-establishment, anti-system, willing to take on power. And I think that's a real strength for him in this world. I also think the thing about Roe that's interesting to me, it's something about Bernie too, and it relates to like Howard Dean's 2004 campaign, like a lesson from that. Like, do you remember what Howard Dean's 2004 campaign, where that came from? Like what the core base of that campaign was?
Was voting against the war.
No, he didn't vote against the war. He just
no, I know.
But that wasn't
because everybody else did. That was running in that race. Remember, there were like 12 senators running.
But that wasn't the start. That wasn't what gave him the like initial.
Was it
like,
healthcare?
No, it was gay rights because he had signed the civil unions bill in
Vermont.
Vermont.
That's right.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And he had like a core of like gay donors who were like, and gay rights people who like formed this like little core that said, okay, this is the guy who's actually done something. With Bernie, it's interesting. His core in 2015 was an interesting one. It was listeners to the Thom Hartmann radio program, which is about 2 million people listen to that program at that point every week, but why? Because every Friday for years, he did a thing with Tom called Brunch with Bernie, where he would take callers for an hour on that show. So like those listeners to that program felt like they had this, like that was like this initial core. It wasn't just, oh, it's a lefty, oh, it's a guy. It was like, oh, this is the guy who's been in my radio for years before, and has been out there. I think what you see now is the question now for a lot of candidates, I think is, and look, I think this is the one of the biggest challenges of 2028. If I were, and I will not work on a presidential campaign. I am too old. I am too tired. And I have too many other things I enjoy doing with my life. So, and to be very truthful,
You've given up the office. You've given up the office.
Several candidates have actually spoken to me, and I've told them all, it's not happening. I'm not doing it again. Like I would say, but the biggest challenge, I think, which is to me, and I know we're jumping around, is how are presidential candidates in the primary going to communicate? Because like, you can't just go buy TV anymore. That's not going to work. You can't just send a bunch of direct mail pieces. You're not going to show up in thousands of people at your rallies. You need to figure that, unless you're AOC, by the way, which is also her core strength, right? She pops out of the gate and we'll have 20,000 people at a rally, right? And she has huge, like, she knows how to communicate in this world.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about like core strengths, like understands how to use social media to communicate her message. And like, I think other candidates are going to very much struggle there because they're not used to it. Yeah.
Can I get you on something else before we go? Because this is a big topic today in the media sphere. Big elections, lots of DSA candidates are winning in big cities. I'm seeing in congressional races in New York, Washington, D.C. mayor's race. It's happening around the country. Um, what is your take on the impact of DSA in the Democratic Party and how the party should be digesting it, embracing it? What should the reaction be of the Democratic Party to this movement?
Well, first off, like, I think a number of those candidates, like, who have won are very much like people I like as people and are very glad they're in Congress. And like, I think I think there have been a number of wins of I think younger voter. First off, they're all younger, right? And that should, Brad Lander kind of being the exception there.
Yeah.
But like, you think
Well, in
about
Washington, he'll be younger. In the Senate, he'll be younger.
he'll be young, yes, he'll be a young guy in Washington. But like,
Yes.
but if you think about like, look, like, you think about the two, there are two members of the House who were Bernie campaign staffers in 2020 now, which is interesting to think about. Like, Ana Lilia Mejia in New Jersey was Bernie's political director, and Maxwell Frost was an advancer on Bernie 2020. Maxwell is the only person who I have said has done he has the EGOT of Bernie land, meaning he advanced for Bernie events, he played music at Bernie events, he spoke at a Bernie event, and Bernie spoke at an event for him. That's the Bernie EGOT. Maxwell's the only person to cover the full Bernie EGOT because he had to DJ. He DJ'd our New Year's event in Iowa, actually, in 2019.
That's fantastic.
Because the musical, something happened with the music, and like he's like, I could DJ and DJ'd it. First off, I think
so. Is it? Are they? First of all, are they Democrats? There's a debate about
I think
that.
for the most part, they are Democrats. Right. I think there's one candidate in New York where, yes, but like the other question and like the question of, are you a Democrat? Like the question is, are you going to like caucus with the Democratic Party is that question. And once that gets, I think, are you a Democrat becomes kind of a silly question. Like, are you going to caucus with the Democratic Party in Congress? If so, fine, you're a Democrat. Right. I think there is, look, I think for us to have a winning coalition on the left, and like, I take this from like having worked now in like 50 countries around the world. We can't just win with one section of the party. And while I'm aligned with that section of the party, like you need every element for us to form a winning coalition. Congress, the House of Representatives in particular, we should start to think about it as like a parliament.
Yeah.
Where like the speaker has to form, even on the right, the speaker has to form a coalition of, standard kind of mainline Republicans, Trumpists, and Freedom Caucus. Right? And has to assemble them together. A successful Democratic speaker is going to have to assemble Josh Gottheimer to Ana Lilia, right? And going to have to bring that. And by the way, the bigger majority a speaker has, the easier it is to obviously assemble because you can move things around. I think what's going to be interesting, and it's just to bring news up today, I think we are about to enter, the Supreme Court has just, with their decision today on party donation structure, has created a world where since 2004, there's been a decline in the power of parties and the power of leaders, right? Because you could just go to a super PAC. You can just, you don't need the party for anything.
Everybody's a political entrepreneur. Yeah.
Right. But the Supreme Court decision today makes it so much more efficient for money to flow through political parties and super PACs, because political parties get discounted ad rates, because they get all that other stuff, that like there's no way those committees aren't kind of re-empowered, which re-empowers the power of the speaker, right? As an institution, which I think is, you can find different, is it good or bad? But look, I think what you have to be able to do as a candidate is like saying like, I don't want that person in the party on both sides, like, is stupid. Like, look, my roommate from the Kerry campaign can be one of the most annoying members of Congress. I was Josh Gottheimer's roommate on the road on the Kerry campaign.
I didn't realize that.
Yes.
Josh and I have been. Did we ever actually room together? But we were totally next door to each other on the West Park campaign.
On Josh's campaign, we were on Kerry's campaign. We were in the room together. Look, I think, there's a need there in certain districts. There are going to be Josh Gottheimers elected, right? In progressive districts, in places, you are going to have a different quality of person elected. Now, I would prefer that we elect the most progressive person by personal ideologies. I would like to elect the most progressive person possible in any district, right? Because I think that generally leads to the world I want. But anybody saying, when I hear, I think it was Tom Scusi from Long Island, who I think now represents the district I grew up in. I think when he says we don't have socialists aren't Democrats, come on, that's okay, so they're not Democrats now, but you certainly will want their votes in swing states in 2028, right? Yep. You're going to need it. And we also have to realize voters, when we think about things as this pure ideological spectrum, we underestimate the both intelligence and motivations of voters. Think about Wisconsin, right? They elect Tammy Baldwin, a very clearly progressive Democrat, to the Senate. And the same voters turn around and elect Ron Johnson, a right-wing Republican, right? So you elect an openly gay progressive woman and a white male conservative right-wing Trumper. And it's the same population of voters voting for both. And in cycle, and by the way, repeatedly cycle after cycle, the same thing happening there. Hopefully Ron Johnson goes away next time because that guy's a real pile of excrement. But
all right.
The question for me is is every, if we're going to have a tent, look, if you're going to have a big tent, you're going to have clowns in the tent.
And who you think is the clown really depends on your own personal ideology,
right? And you just have
to
a
clown to me is not necessarily a clown to you,
and
but you're right.
Look, we have to be willing to say, look, and sometimes people on both sides are going to say things and do things that are dumb, and we have to understand that the person getting elected in Nebraska too, which will now elect a Democrat, is going to have to be a fundamentally different Democrat than gets elected in, say, Greg Kazar's district in Austin, right outside of Austin, right? That's going to be a progressive district, and we're able to elect Greg Kazar, and Greg Kazar's a great member of Congress. You go 2 districts over in Texas, maybe we can get a Democrat elected there, but it's going to be a fundamentally different type of Democrat. And look, sometimes we're going to need to say, that's wrong. They're going to need to oppose each other. I think where you get my problem with, let's call it, centrist Democrats is different than my problem with moderate Democrats. My problem with centrist Democrats as a part of the party is when they cause stupid changes just to make some dumb point that's not going to benefit anyone. My core one was, I remember, I think this is I don't think I'm giving away a secret here. Whatever. If I am, I am. I don't think I am.
Better if you
give it away.
Yeah,
give it away.
I think it is a public story.
Give it away.
During the Obamacare negotiations, when they were trying to get Lieberman, Harry Reid called me and said, "Okay, we're not going to get the public option, but but Lieberman has said yes to lowering the Medicare eligibility age to 55. I think that was over a scale. Do you think progressives can accept that as a compromise?" Right? And I was yes, because that's the track progressives have always talked about, is let's continually lower let's slide into universal health care by lowering the Medicare eligibility age. And he's great, Lieberman's on board. I think we have this done. And then apparently Lieberman heard progressives were happy about this deal and was no deal, right? That type of dumb centrism, right, is I'm not doing something because I think it's a good policy, or I'm doing it because the other side did one thing or liked it, so I have to be the center, And that leads to like, and I think for Democrats, the other dangerous thing is like, look, I think there is a culture in DC that derives a kind of like K Street consensus that like allows, you know, the truth about like corruption in DC is like you guys know this for being around. There's like very few people who are like outwardly corrupt. Like, who was the guy with like the bricks of cash in his freezer, member of Congress? I forget who that was.
right.
Oh,
Jefferson.
yeah, from Louisiana.
Jefferson. Like there's like outwardly corrupt crap. Like that's very rare and far between. And when they do it, they tend to get, but like it doesn't last very long and they tend to get busted for it. Cause it's outside the culture, but the K Street problem is like, it's not like even big donations, right? Because the biggest donors in the party, mainly are kind of like general just Democrats, right? Like some of whom are actually super progressive, like weirdly.
Yeah.
And like are like, tax me, take my money away, do universal healthcare, no wars, right? There are, but like the culture in DC gets distorted by like, you know this, I'm a member of Congress and this weekend I'm doing my big Jackson Hole golf weekend. And if your PAC contributes $5,000, so there are literally people in Washington whose job it is as lobbyists, their like trade association contributes $5,000. And this week they're going to the Jackson Hole golf weekend with Congressman blah, blah, blah. Next week they're going to the like, the Phillies game with, I'm thinking of one particular lobbyist in my head right now. It was literally like their favorite activities. They're going to the Phillies game with Congressman blah, blah, blah on this committee. And then next week they're going to like a
Martha's Vineyard.
Martha's Vineyard for $5,000. And what that means is like it's not that these people are even contributing a lot of money because they're just $5,000. It's really just $5,000 at a time, right? But what it does do is means the communications flow. They're accessing these people. They have communications with these people. And like, I think the thing, Democrat, be centrist, be moderate, but be authentic to your district and be you. And what you shouldn't be doing is like tilting yourself in different directions or doing things because like it appeals to that like K Street group of Democrats, because that to me is what's toxic. And I think, by the way, at a presidential level, I think you're seeing every candidate instinctually run away from that as like a thing. I think it affects more Congress than anything else.
All right. Well, that's going to be where we're leaving today. All right. Thank you for
Thank you, Jamal.
us.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.